Wrap this up today as a way of knowing. I just want to discuss a couple more things about emotion. And specifically, yesterday we talked about how emotion could impede or be a block or an obstacle to acquiring knowledge. But today I want to flip the script and I want to talk about how you could use emotion as a source of knowledge. How could you know things using emotion as the way of knowing? If we go back to the very beginning of this course, when I asked you guys, tell me something you know, and then I said, well, how do you know that? One example of emotion as a way of knowing would be you said, well, I know I love my mom or something like that. And if I was to say, well, how do you know that? And you'd say, well, I feel it. So in that case, emotion was a source of knowledge. You knew that you loved your mom because emotion was that way. Okay. Now you could have added other reasons. You could have said, well, it makes sense. It's reasonable. So that means you use reason. I know I love my mom because my dad told me I have to. So that's maybe language, that through language you acquired this knowledge. Maybe it was sense perception, etc. Okay. But let's look at some other ways of sort of ways we can look at emotion as a source of knowledge. Okay, before I go to this, just stepping back to what we talked about yesterday. Yesterday we were talking about irrational behavior. And one thing I'm not sure if I got to yesterday was there was an ancient society of philosophers known as the Stoics. The Stoics was a group that advocated for a state of mind called apathy, which literally meant without passion, which was they said that in order to be a very reasonable person, you have to remove emotion from your sort of way of thinking. So they said in order to be a clear thinker, you have to remove emotion completely. And that's what the Stoics tried to do. And that's where those word origins came from. Words like apathy and being a Stoic comes from that group of philosophers who said that because emotion can really lead to irrational behavior, we have to remove emotion completely to think rationally, because they really believed in reason and rationality as the strongest source of true knowledge. So, flipping the script on that, despite the view of that, imagine a life without emotion. Imagine this life where you actually were able to completely remove emotion from your way of thinking all the time, that you were always cold and unemotional, and that you literally had no emotions. For those of you who might remember, there was a science fiction television show called Star Trek, where there was this character, Mr. Spock, who that was sort of his deal on that show. That Mr. Spock came from an alien race that tried to remove emotions completely from their society. Now, what made that show interesting was Mr. Spock was actually half human. And as a result, he would always have this conflict where he was having trouble removing emotion. Now, philosopher Steven Pinker says that Spock the character is not so much that he doesn't have emotion, he's just always trying to control his emotion. So I'm going to pose that question out to you guys, right? Could you actually do this? Could you actually suppress your emotions? So they've done biological studies on, for example, patients who've suffered brain damage. And as a result of brain damage, they've been able to remove, or they've had removed, it wasn't something they chose to do, emotions from their sort of way of thinking, okay? And what happened was when they studied these poor individuals who suffered this form of brain damage, where they don't feel emotion anymore, most of the time they lead very, very troubled lives, that it's very difficult for them to lead a normal life in terms of getting a job and having significant others in their life, etc. That by removing emotions, it made their life as a human being much harder, okay? So you'll see here on this slide, I talk about a patient named Elliot who this happened to, suffered emotional damage, or suffered brain damage to that portion of his brain that controlled emotion. So in many aspects, he could lead what we would call a normal life in terms of like he could perform IQ tests And it didn't show, despite his brain damage, that he performed any differently on those IQ tests like he did before his accident. But it was his decision making that really suffered. It was said that Elliot could not make simple decisions, that without emotions, it was difficult for him to make those final decisions. That just very simple things like, what am I going to have for dinner, right? All the way up to much more complex decisions like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Were very, very difficult because what is speculated is without having emotions to guide us, the final decision-making piece that we do all the time based on reason alone is very difficult. And it led to a form of mental paralysis where poor Elliot just couldn't get to that point without his emotions that he could make decisions. So what is the connection between reason and emotion? Before we explore this, I'm going to ask you guys to participate real briefly in the chat right now. I believe I've actually already asked you this question, but if you could suppress your emotions, like turn them off, okay, which would be the easiest to turn off? Type into the chat window which you think would be the easiest emotion for you to turn off if you were able to turn it off. And while you guys are doing that, I'm just going to do one more quick attendance check. And I'm also going to do a volume check to make sure my speakers are still on. Yeah, they are. And nobody's typing in the chat window. Oh, here we go. Get some first people starting to chat. That's great. And while that's happening, I'm just going to do a quick attendance check. And Latanya is now here. And Elizabeth is now here. So everybody was here now. Okay, now I'm going back to the chat window. Let's see what's in the chat window. Okay, so a couple answers you can see in there. The easiest might be grief or love or happiness or anger. Now, you might remember the last time I asked this question was when we looked at the so-called primary emotions. But I'm not going to go there. I'm going to let you write any emotion you think would be easy to suppress. Happiness might be easy to suppress. Anger, sadness, grief, fear, okay? Now, I could ask the question, which is the hardest to suppress? But I think we're going to get similar answers. It's going to be a wide mix. I think it's very personal, right? I think it's a very personal decision. I don't think it's something we could say it's just a general idea that this is the one that most of us could suppress, and this is the one that would be hardest for most of us to suppress, okay? I feel like it is a personal sort of thing there, that it's a bigger part of who you are as a person, is your individual ability or non-ability to suppress or control emotions. And obviously suppressing them completely is difficult. Some speculate, and I would agree with this, that it's actually impossible to suppress your emotions. But we could talk about controlling them in that sense. Okay, let's look at this relationship between reason and emotion, okay? The question I'm posing now is, do you think you could literally feel nothing, okay? Okay, and then the second question, could you literally think nothing? So I'm going to put those into the chat window. Could you feel nothing and could you think nothing? So yes and no to those two questions. You can type them both on one line if you want, like yes, comma, no, or no, comma, no. Could you think you could get yourself to a state where you literally feel nothing and you literally think nothing? And again, I'm not going to put any parameters on this. It's sort of your opinion if you think so. So I see a yes and a no. Okay. So no and a no, right? So we're seeing no so far in the thinking. So is it possible to think nothing? Like it's absolutely impossible to think about anything. It's interesting. My wife and I were having trouble sleeping last night. And I said to her, something I read online a couple of weeks ago was, you know, it's weird. In order for us to go to sleep, we have to act like we're sleeping. And I said, I guess we're just bad actors tonight. We can't act like we're sleeping well enough to go to sleep. And I just thought that was kind of a weird thought experiment there. But yeah, I agree with a lot of you guys. I don't think I can literally think nothing. I feel like my brain is constantly thinking something. Okay. Can I literally feel nothing? Again, it depends on how literally versus how specifically I take those points, right? Like I think depending on how detailed I want to get it, I could probably say yes to both of those. Or if I get a little more detailed, I could probably say no to both of those. And you guys can see in the chat window, some of you have some very excellent points there, okay? But what I'm doing there is I'm tending to put them as two separate things, that both reason and thought and emotion are separate things. But maybe they're not. Maybe they are much more related than we think. Maybe they're not separate things. Maybe they are, the answer is one answer, not two answers. Okay, so rather than think of reason and emotion as completely separate things, maybe let's see them as some sort of interconnected set of ways of knowing. And I'm going to put them on a continuum, okay? So if you have a very furious emotion, or you're doing a math problem where you're solving a math problem that requires a lot of reasoning skills, maybe when you're solving that math problem, your emotions are at a very low level, that by turning up reason, it tends to turn down emotion. And subsequently, when we turn up emotion, it tends to turn down our reason. Maybe they're interconnected in that way, on that sort of continuum. So right now, some of you might be kind of bored, right? So by being bored in this class, it's turning down your reasoning emotion. That feeling of boredom, the stronger it gets, the stronger your boredom is, the less you can reason. And then as boredom turns into annoyance, which turns into anger, maybe then the more our emotions start sharpening and strengthening, the less we can reason. For those of you maybe are finding this a little more interesting, and now you're engaging your reasoning centers. You're starting to think about these questions I'm posing. Maybe that is bringing down the emotional state of boredom. And now you wouldn't describe yourself as bored. You might describe yourself as engaged, right? But maybe not happy or anything like that. You're not ecstatic you're in TOK right now. But your emotional state is changing based on a reason emotion sort of paradigm, a different sort of continuum there. Now, I'm not proposing this is something that has to be accepted. I'm proposing it as an idea, as a way to look at how reason and emotion could be connected to each other. Maybe it's better to think of emotions by themselves as emotions having a rational component to it. In other words, you could say, how rational is this emotion? So if someone said to you, how are you feeling today? And you're like, I feel really angry. You could say, well, how rational is that anger? How reasonable is it to be angry right now? So now you're looking at the emotion and the rationality of the emotion itself. So there's a corresponding connection again between reason and emotion. Okay. So you can see at the bottom of the slide, I say an emotion that is sensitive to the real nature of a situation could be considered more rational than one that is not. So this says that we tend to put our emotions into the context of our situation and use our reasoning skills to set our emotional level to the level it should be at, right? So if you're in a situation that, like, for example, if you're in a car accident and someone you know in the car is injured quite seriously, then that situation reasonably would require your emotions to be turned up to a level that makes sense. It wouldn't be reasonable for you to be super happy or indifferent about the fact that the person you care about is seriously injured. Like, oh, well, that person's seriously hurt. Whatever. That's unreasonable. So your reason should be situationally placed on that emotion. That's another way you could possibly look at it. Aristotle spoke about this as well, famous philosopher, okay? Here's how he spoke of anger. Anyone can be angry. That is easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, that's not easy. So what he's saying there is emotion alone, just a raw emotion, is very easy for us to do. but to then place that emotion within the context of who it's with and what degree and at the time and in the purpose behind that emotion. That's very difficult for us to combine our reasoning and our emotion skills in that way. So actually, in the two hypothetical situations on this slide, one of which I already kind of talked about, where let's look at these two situations. So Paul is arranged to meet Tom at 3 o'clock. Tom arrives at 3:02 and says, "Oh, I'm sorry I'm late." Rather than accept the apology, Paul starts screaming and shouting at Tom, "You idiot, you are so inconsiderate. Why are you late?" Okay? Remember, he arrived 2 minutes late. So if we look at what Aristotle meant in that first situation, is it reasonable for Paul to be that angry at Tom? Is his emotion of anger reasonable? Now let's look at the second scenario. The hospital phones Judy with terrible news. Her boyfriend has been assaulted and is unconscious and in intensive care. She says, "Oh dear, that's annoying. I wanted to play golf this afternoon. Oh, I guess I'll have to go visit him in the hospital." Now, in this situation, it would be argued as well that I think Judy is also not reasonable with how little emotion she's showing in this situation. Maybe Judy should be showing more emotion towards her boyfriend for the injury there. So that's, I think, what Aristotle means is how do we place our emotion into the context of our situation? And is that a factor of our reasoning skills? Okay. So you could describe those emotions as irrational emotions. Paul showing too much emotion, Judy showing too little emotion. Okay. Both of those could be irrational, and we need to find this balance between reason and emotion. Okay. Now, how rational we can place our emotions might also be a factor of the emotion itself, right? Maybe it's easy to make motions like, if I go back to what you guys put in the chat window, and I scroll up a little bit from what you guys put, the emotions you can control. So some of you said happiness is an emotion we can control. Well, maybe happiness can be controlled by reason easier than, say, an emotion like fear. That despite our ability to rationalize things, fear might be very difficult to control because maybe we consider fear a very strong emotion compared to happiness. It's hard to say. I haven't never asked you guys that question. Which emotion do you think is the strongest emotion? Because maybe that's the way we measure it. We measure the strongest emotion by how we can control it. So if it is one that is difficult to control, maybe that to us is what we would call our strongest emotion. I'm not going to ask you guys that question. That's just something to think about. Okay, so I did pose a question in a previous class where I said, where you were in a dark room and you thought there was a snake there, and then it turns out once the light came on, it was actually just a pile of rope, right? Well, that's our reasoning center and our sense perception overriding the emotion at that point. So similarly, garter snakes are harmless. We live in a province where you can actually go to a giant pit of garter snakes. By the way, if you've never done that, if you've never gone to the Narcisse snake pits in Manitoba, highly recommend it. I've gone several times. It is an excellent thing to do, an excellent Manitoba thing to do, is to go see those snake pits. Hang on one second. There we go. Sorry, I knew my volume was not working there for a second. So if you haven't done so, do that. However, even though we know they're harmless, people are still afraid of snakes. Similarly, statistically, it is safer to fly in an airplane than to drive in a car. Yet, a lot of people, I can say my sister, have a really strong fear of flying. So, and they even know that. They know that the fear is irrational. People know that they shouldn't be afraid of garter snakes. Their reasoning center knows this, yet they still can't overcome the fear. So maybe that's a justification that some emotions we just can't override, right? What about being disgusted, right? So there was this, you may have read ahead on this slide. There was this experiment they did where they invited people to eat fudge that was shaped like dog poop. And they were invited to drink apple juice out of a bedpan. Now, they were told ahead of time, this is not dog poop. This is beautifully created fudge. It's delicious fudge. We just shaped it like dog poop. And this bedpan is completely sterilized. We completely cleaned it. But the vast majority of people refuse to do either of those. So now I'm going to ask you guys a question in the chat window. Would you do this? You are given, like if this was in class and I gave you guys some fudge that I told you, I'm not tricking you. This is fudge, but it's shaped like dog poop. And I would like you to drink this apple juice out of this bedpan that is completely sterile. Would you or would you not eat the fudge and drink and it's one question, like you can say yes or no to both. Would you eat the fudge and drink the apple juice? So it's difficult. This is a hypothetical. I wish I could actually try to. I don't think I would ever do this experiment in class. I think it might be a bit on the edge of appropriate or not appropriate, but it's good to use it as a thought experiment. Would you guys actually do this? So I can see some typing going on in the chat window. So I'll wait to seeing what you guys say right now. Would you eat and drink those two items? Okay, as the answers come in, I'm just going to slightly move forward so we don't fall behind in class today. Okay. So as you guys are putting in your answers, it is difficult to switch off irrational emotions. Okay. And so as a result, this leads back to what we talked about the other day. We might then therefore rationalize behaviors. We might say, no, I'm not going to do it. And here's my rationalization. So that sort of circle of rationalization we talked about before is a possibility. Now, I want to talk real briefly about what some other psychologists have talked about in this regard. So there's a famous psychologist, Abraham Maslow, in 1954, tried to look at sort of human behavior in a sort of psychological way. Some of you may have heard of this before. It's called Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. And it looks like this. This is the hierarchy of needs that Maslow proposed. What he said in this hierarchy was, sorry, the chat window is updating here with the yes and no's. Okay, you can see the no, 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 nope, nope, nope. I don't think so. Yeah, I agree. I don't think I would have eaten or drank it as well. Now, here's what Maslow's hierarchy of needs states: that the bottom of this pyramid are our psychological needs, that we have these psychological needs that are very basic, right? Like eating is a psychological need, breathing, sleeping. As you move higher up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we get to the top of the pyramid. Those, Maslow would argue, are needs that we have that are not necessarily basic needs. These are much higher level needs. So let's go to somewhere in the middle, the love and belonging section, that human beings have a need for family and friendship, but that's not a basic need. That's not something we just need to survive. That's a higher level need that we have in a love and a belonging sort of category. Just below that, we have a set of safety needs, right? That we need to make sure we're safe, that we have a job, that we have income, that we have family, that the people we care about are protected. Those are safety needs. Just above, we see those esteem needs. Those are very personal, right? Like I want to feel confident in myself. I want to feel like I've achieved things. I want to feel respected. Those are higher level needs according to Maslow on this hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a debated topic, but it is fairly well accepted in the psychological community that this hierarchy of needs exists and that we can kind of categorize our needs in there. And what you'll notice in that hierarchy is some of those needs are emotional needs. This is how emotion can fit into that. So according to Maslow, an individual is act upon the growth of needs only if the needs below it are met on the hierarchy. So we can't possibly think about morality and creativity if we're worried about getting food that day. So at the lowest level, we have to satisfy those needs first, right? Like right now, all of you are breathing. All of you got some amount of sleep and some amount of food, right? And have gone to the bathroom today. But right now, if one of you needs to really strongly go to the bathroom, that need is going to take over other needs. You're not going to necessarily be worried about being respected right now if you really have to, say, go to the washroom or eat. That those needs will override the higher level needs because they're very basic, that we need those low level needs satisfied first. Now let's move up. Let's say we're up to the level of love and belonging. And you have lots of friends and you have a good family. Maybe you have a significant other. Now you can maybe address needs above that on the hierarchy. So now you can look at, like, now that you've met those needs, achievement, respect, and things like that. So this is an interesting thing, again, that you could incorporate into an essay or into a TOK presentation if you're very interested in this type of psychological examination of needs and how it could connect to TOK, okay? So that to meet our belonging needs, right, our love and belonging needs, we have to meet the needs below it. To meet our esteem level needs, okay, we need to sort of address our egos. We need to address all the needs below it, etc. Okay? As we wrap up this unit, we can again connect to things like logical fallacies, which we looked at in the reason unit, right? That a lot of our philosophy is to distrust emotion because reason is more important. That's what the Stoics said in their ancient philosophy society, right? That maybe removing emotion would be the ideal, right? But maybe when we take into consideration how we interact in social groups, emotion is very crucial to that interaction, right? That what if we are the ones in charge of, say, a government system, and we were an emotionless person? What if the premier of our province had zero emotions? Making decisions for others based on those lack of emotions might have dire consequences on the people you're making decisions for, right? So how should emotion enter into this? We also don't want, say, our premier to be overly emotional in their decision making, okay? So is emotion, how does it fit into the process? This is an open-ended question that could easily be addressed in a TOK presentation or a TOK essay. So I've already talked quite a bit about this, but you can see even more sort of points in these slides, right? Like, for example, it says there, is the style of communication, like that's talking about language, is the way we communicate an important part of this? How important is emotion in the way we communicate through our language? So not just in reasoning, but how important is emotion in all of our ways of knowing? Okay, so moving forward here, I want to kind of zip through these remainder of the slides because I am cognizant of the time we have left, right? So if you want to dig deeper into these types of emotion versus reason sort of discussions and how they connect to logical fallacies, you can certainly read through these on your own time in more detail and look to, for example, how does emotion fit into the appeal to fear as or the appeal to belonging as a fallacy, right? And empathy is something I didn't want to get into too much detail on, but you can see here as well that there's a little more detail about empathy as an emotional component. Can we actually create empathy in others? Can we teach empathy to others? If you want more on empathy, I can go into that after we're back from remote learning. So I'm going to kind of quickly just sort of skip through those and end our look at emotion right now, okay? So I just got under the time there. So that's it for this week, everybody. That's it for TOK for this week. if you guys have questions, like you've already asked, please let me know. Please contact me through email. A lot of you guys are doing really good in this course and the marks are really good, but I feel like some of you are missing a couple components and it isn't really showing up in your Power School yet. And I don't want you guys to see a dramatic mark change without being aware of what I'm putting into your Power School. So if you are confused by all the marking sheets and handback folders and Power School grades, please email me or contact me so I can explain it better to you. Maybe email's better. Maybe I can lay it out in email for you guys. And if not, you guys should have a good day. Now, one last thing. I'm not going to see you guys for a week now. And who knows if we might be put on more remote learning by the end of the week. But it is the end of the week. So it's time for me to offer the bad joke of the week. And there's the bell. So I'm not even going to ask. Did you guys hear about the 2 antennas that got married? 2 car antennas. They got married. It was a nice ceremony, but the reception was amazing. Have a great day, everybody. And I'll see you guys next week.
Bye, Mr. Walks.
Bye, Mr. Fox.
Bye.